It's available.
Is it on Amazon India?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, and if it is on Amazon, so it is on Amazon.
No, I don't think it's on Amazon. It's on something else that Film Arts or something like that.
Yeah, we have 1 minute now.
And it's in bookstores too, the publisher told me.
Yeah.
It'll be in the States and England February 20th, Mark.
Now we will be starting shortly, so this will go on record. So. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to people who are watching us from different time zones of the world. On behalf of India International Center, I extend a warm welcome to all of you to this virtual book discussion on the book East and West, Stories of India by Catherine and John, with an introduction by Diane Scuff. For this discussion, we are fortunate to have been joined by a very distinguished panel of speakers. We have with us Professor Sukrita Paul Kumar, who is going to chair this program. Professor Sukrita is a poet, critic, and academician of many years of standing. She has over 4 decades of teaching experience at graduate and postgraduate level. She has been the recipient of many prestigious grants as well as national and international fellowships and residencies. Her major research project with the UGC, that is University Grants Commission, led to the publication of her book, Narrating Partition Texts, Interpretations, Ideas. She is the chief editor of the book entitled Cultural Diversity, Linguistic Plurality, and Literary Traditions of India, a textbook prescribed by the University of Delhi for course use in the honors BA program. Welcome, Professor Kumar, to this discussion. We are joined by the author of the book, Ms. Catherine N. Jones. She has played major roles in over 50 productions on and off Broadway, led to becoming an award-winning author. She has authored 11 plays produced in and out of New York City and has written films including Unlikely Angel, Dolly Parton, The Christmas Wife, and the popular television series Touched by an Angel. A Fulbright scholar to India, studying shamanism, teaching graduate school, the New School University in New York City, and USC Film School in Los Angeles, as well as at the SL Omega Pacifica Graduate Institutes. She is the award-winning author of Heal Yourself with Writing, The Way of Story, What Story Are You Living, Fruits Oracle, True Fables, Buddha and the Dancing Girl, A Creative Life, East-West Stories of India 2023, and Remarkable Woman, 4 plays, again in 2023. She has over 60,000 subscribers to her 6 online courses found on her homepage. Welcome, Catherine, to this discussion.
Thank you.
We also have with us Mr. Roger Edwin Markley, who's an American Foundation administrator. He is the founding board director of Special Children's Foundation, Ojai, 1981, trustee since 1981, and vice president, Ojai Fund for Environmental during 1981 to 83. He was the principal at various institutes that include Clearwater Ranch Children's Home, Santa Rosa, California, during 1964 to 1965, principal Rishi Valley School, Andhra Pradesh, 65 to 72, Alpha Training Center, Santa Barbara, 1972 to 75, and founding director, Oak Grove School, Ojai, California, 75 to 85. Executive director, editor, newsletter, and bulletin, Krishnamurti Foundation, American, Ojai since 1985. He is also secretary, Sunny House Incorporation, Santa Barbara, 1990. Mr. Lee has been listed as a noteworthy foundation administrator by Marcus Huesco. Welcome, Mr. Lee, to
Thank
this
you.
discussion.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. We also have with us Professor Sachin Kekhetkar, who is professor in the English Faculty of Arts, the Maharaja Sayajid University, Baroda, Vadodara. He is a bilingual writer, translator, editor, blogger, and researcher based in Baroda, Gujarat. His most recent book is, he's a prolific writer, and his most recent book is Changlia Kavitavarchi Statutory Warning, Samkalin Marathi Kavita, Jagti Karan Ani Bashantar, published in 2016, which is a collection of Marathi articles on contemporary Marathi poetry, globalization, and translation. His books in English include Skin Spam and Other Fake Encounters, Selected Marathi Poems in Translation, 2011, Migrating Words, Reflections on Indian Translation Studies in 2010, and A Diary for the Dead Dog and Other Incantations, 2003. He has extensively translated present-day Marathi poetry, most of which is collected in the anthology Live Update, an anthology of recent Marathi poetry, 2005, which has been edited by him. He has translated fiction by George Lee Bourges, Ted Hughes, and Adam Thopre into Marathi. He won Indian Literature Poetry Translation Prize given by Indian Literature Journal Sahitya Academy, New Delhi, for translation of modern Gujarati poetry in 2000. Apart from rendering the 15th century Gujarati poet Narsingh Mehta for his doctoral research, he has also translated numerous modern Gujarati writers like Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, Bhupen Kakkar, Jayant Khatri, Rajendra Patel, Nazir Mansoori, and Mona Patrawala into English. Welcome, Professor Ketkar. And with this brief introduction, may I request Professor Suprita Paul Kumar to take this session forward. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Usha. This is such a privilege to be with such distinguished panelists, co-panelists, with whom we will be sharing ideas amongst ourselves. And what more do we want but to really have a heart-to-heart conversation also with Catherine Ann Jones, who is herself a legendary figure, but also she was married to Raja Rao. And Raja Rao is a big legend in Indian culture, literature, and so on. And we know all about it. But if we start talking about Raja Rao, where will be the time to talk about Catherine, who is such a wonderful storyteller and also a theater person. So we will focus on you, Catherine, more in this session. And obviously, but we cannot not mention Raja Rao here. That is why I mentioned him. And at some point of time, we would also like to know if there were any influences that you had experienced, vis-a-vis Raja Rao in your writing and in your aesthetics. But we'll come to that later. I do want to here very quickly say that when I was going through I didn't get the time to really do any in-depth reading because I got the book only a couple of days ago. But in spite of that, I mean, the readability of the stories is so beautiful, and it's sort of they just take you from one point to another. And it's almost as though they also show you a mirror to yourself, even if this is more a mirror to all humanity, I would say, to everyone, East or West. And I like the fact that you are not in your title saying East versus West. It is East and West. And I really appreciate it because usually the paradigm that comes to one's mind is as though there's been a battle going on between East and West. We come together, all of us, even if there are cultural and historical differences, even if there are some specific differences in the context of even politics and so on, or social, social movements. But the fact is that we are all human beings, and somewhere we come together emotionally and in terms of the thought patterns that we all have. So I would say that East and West is a wonderful title. And when I was looking at the titles also, of some of the stories, immediately I wanted to read them all. And, things like The Men's Club. And I have to mention this story because, this is about IIC. And yet it's not only about IIC, but what IIC and this is where we are now holding this particular discussion. And India International Center is for many of us a place where we all together as kind of formal, informal, exchanges of ideas all the time. And it is here that many times great secrets are also shared. And it becomes a very private moment as well in a public space. So I think this is wonderful that the story takes us to that. And I need to also really appreciate the way you have created an entire ambience, which is so easy to get into. And it is also, something like Tea with Mrs. Gandhi. I mean, racy, absolutely racy ideas, and yet profound thought processes behind the coming together of these ideas or expression. So whether we talk about religion or secularism, politics, or geographical terrain, or inner journeys, there are so many things that come out. What I appreciate is that your love for storytelling. If you were not to have that, we would not be sitting and reading it in the way we are, these stories, this book, primarily because you are a teller of stories which can encompass the inner and the outer reality so beautifully. The divine and the ordinary come together, the inner and the outer come together. There are so many contradictions which are not contradictions, really. And that's what you see in East and West as the title as well. And also what I'll just very quickly mention this before we go on to the next, bit of the program. I think what I really appreciate is also that every story has a kind of an aphorism or aphoristic statement that you have given from elsewhere, other writers. So there is also camaraderie of other writers that you see in the book. For instance, you have Faulkner, you have Campbell, Joseph Campbell. So reminders of other geniuses, as it were, with just short statements, which can trigger off your desire to read the short story in front of you. So all of this makes up a beautiful dessert, as well as the main body of experience. The story they vibrate experientially. They vibrate experientially because it's not theoretical positions that you are taking. It's not discourses. Even when there are political references, they are only references, because the incident matters. Incident may not be externally worked out. It's not linear sometimes, but the layering happens. The layering is very much there. And that's what I really appreciate, because even in the story, like I think that's the first story, Cat Who Does Not Die. So, I mean, it's a big intrigue. It's lovely. It's so beautiful. It's very intimate. And it sort of shows how we internalize, some relationships, be it a human being or an animal. It depends on what kind of an attachment. And death does not matter. Because the internalization is so strong that the cat lingers on, despite the fact that, the story of life, living life continues. So I think these are some of the very few comments that I would like to make, apart from many things that come to mind as you're also, there must be a lot of autobiographical element. Where do you draw the line between autobiography and, impersonal story? I do not know. but it's aesthetics. So something that can be very subjective can become objective and yet reflect on subjective experience. And I sense that. But one last thing, what I feel is there isn't that, you normally say, okay, an American lady writing stories about India, it must be exoticization or a total condemnation, of what the Indian reality is. But I think it's the coming together of these contradictions which come up very well. You don't sort of exaggerate the exoticism, cultural exoticism that we have here. We do have living mythology all the time, all around, But, and we can ourselves exoticize this, exoticize all of that. And we know the whole theoretical position that Edward Said took about, and he wrote the whole book called Orientalism. So I think it's because it is storytelling and not discourse, which makes all the difference. And thank you for doing the book. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about it. And maybe we leave the platform to you for a little while now to tell us about the book a little more.
Thank you, Sagrita. Well, I should start by saying India is my spiritual home. I've lived there many years, and it's in the geography of my heart, no matter where I happen to be. I thought I'd just quickly read the short preface I wrote to the book, which sort of shares why. Before I read the preface, I found a wonderful quote by Albert Camus, and I have it on the page before the preface. This quote: "Fiction is the lie we use to tell the truth." I thought, and that encompasses, because when I'm teaching writing, I always say that fiction is disguised autobiography. So many of the stories, there's a seed of truth. I actually did have tea with Mrs. Gandhi, but in the story, it's someone else who does. Here's the preface for East and West Stories of India. I start with a quote by an old friend from my New York years, Muriel Rukeyser, the poet, who said, "The world is made up of stories, not atoms." End of quote. Stories orient the life of a people through time, establishing the reality of their world. Thus, meaning and purpose are given to people's lives. Without stories, we do not exist. They are how we discover who we are. This particular collection of stories is imagined, though sometimes inspired by fact. They came about because of a marriage that carried me away to far-off India, which in time became my spiritual home. India is a vast and complex country, and one that can change a life, containing the highest mystical experiences side by side with the lowest dregs of humanity. From my own experience of living many years in India, the sublime mythology of this incredible and complex culture so permeates the personal that myth often becomes reality and reality myth. The aim of these stories is to serve as a kind of portal into the daily lives and emotional realities that reflect the rich depth and humanity that is India. Every country has its shadows, so I do deal with the shadow side of India. One interesting anecdote I thought I would share some of the stories I assumed were totally imagined. One of the stories is called Murder in Assam. I've never been to Assam, and I thought I totally made up this story. A colleague of mine who did an early review of the stories, without my knowing, sent it to a friend of his in Bangalore, who is, I think she's CEO of a company in Bangalore. And anyway, she wrote to me saying that Murder in Assam, the story I wrote about the women tea pickers in Assam on the tea estates, that it actually happened. So sometimes you can write something. It reminded me of Plato's Oversoul, where all of knowledge is there. And sometimes intuitively you can pull down something you think you've made up, but it's happened. It's about the exploitation of the young women who pick the tea. I added the murder part. That did not actually happen, but I thought that was amazing because the one story that didn't have a kernel of my own experience turned out to be actually fact also. Anyway, the stories are diverse. One is about a past life of a Devadasi, because I was always fascinated. Years ago, I had the privilege to meet Subbalakshmi, the great Carnatic singer, who is herself the daughter of a Devadasi. And that always fascinated me. So I drew on that. I'll just throw it open. I'm open to any questions you have. And I will answer one thing you said about my late husband, Raja Rao. I am a fan of his wonderful books. I think my favorite is The Serpent and the Rope. And as to influence, at most of the time during the 20 years we were married, my focus was acting in the theater. So it was a different focus. But he did, he liked my play Calamity Jane very much when I wrote that. He thought that, and he was right, that that's had more production than the other 11 plays. The one thing he left with me, he said, and when you focus on your creative work, never give it your all, and don't count pennies when it comes to your work. And he left me with that, I'm grateful to say. So I'm open to questions from any of you, and I'm really happy to have this panel here today.
Thank you.
So-
Thank you very much, Catherine. Lovely. I'm very happy that we've got a glimpse into your approach to creativity and also to the entire approach to India as a spiritual home. You didn't have to continue to be in India to carry that home within yourself. And that is the beauty of it, because you discover it and then it stays with you no matter where you are. And that is the, I think there is a story here on a Fulbrighter, probably suggesting that, which I really appreciate. And I somehow sense that it was a little autobiographical, but that doesn't matter, because what is in reality, what you look at reality can be very mythical, and the other way around, the mythical being a real, or the real being mythical. So it's interchangeable. However, I do want to say this to the listeners, that in case you have a question, and we have an opportunity right now to actually put your question on the chat box so that we can, at the end of the presentations, put them forward to the panelists and whoever wants to answer. Mainly, we have Catherine with us, which is wonderful, and she is willing to answer questions. So please put them up on the chat as a quick Q&A, and we'll have that session immediately after we all of us finish having the first round of conversation. So shall we move on to the next presenter, Professor Sachin Ketkar from Gujarat, who will now give his remarks on what he has read and on Catherine as a writer.
Thank you very much for having me. Whether it's a good thing or bad thing, I don't know, because Professor Sukrita has touched upon almost all important points that I had thought of, especially regarding autobiography and fiction and the question of representation of East. But I just want to add to what she has said. And what struck me as something which is remarkable about these stories is that in spite of the protagonist being a Westerner and on a spiritual quest, you don't romanticize or idealize India in a way to lose sight of social and political realities. And that struck me in the story that Sukrita brought up just now, Tea with Mrs. Gandhi, but also Body in the Well, which I really liked, apart from the story that we have talked. And the violence and a certain kind of cruelty and barbarism, which is part of probably all human societies, is something that you never lose sight of. So though India becomes one of the maybe places to go in search of a higher self, but the real India is something that also attracts you, in the sense, what I mean by real India is what maybe most of Indians have to go through as part of their everyday lives. So that really struck me, Tea with Mrs. Gandhi and following her assassination, and how you speak of two Sikh bodyguards that the protagonist sees, and then you receive the news of those bodyguards and what happened to that. So I really find that fascinating. So how would you respond to the conventional Orientalist tropes about India versus your own experiences, which you have drawn upon in your own writing? That's one of the things that came to my mind. I'm sure you would respond to it, but I would also like to add one more question, which was touched upon by Sukrita ji, was regarding the question of writing, healing, and spirituality, and which also is your one of very important preoccupations as a writer as well as an intellectual. I could not go through most of the stories, but I'm just going through this story about Devdasi. And you mentioned another story as well about the past lives. And past life is something that has always remained for me an area of curiosity. I myself have been experimenting a bit, trying to figure out whether it's all my imagination or whether it's a thing. So, but even then, as a fiction writer, there is nothing better than probably these motifs as a writer. So how do you negotiate writing and spirituality as a practice and as a writer? So these are the two things that came to my mind.
Well, you've brought up several. Sorry. Shall I respond?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, you've brought up several interesting points. One thing about the past lives, let me respond. After my Fulbright year in India, I was called Guest of the Government, and they brought me back. And during that, they took me on a trip to Jaipur, where I hadn't been, to Rajasthan. And astrology is a hobby with me. And I've also been a psychic reader for 48 years. So I'm kind of in that woo-woo world, as some Americans call it. And so I asked to see a well-known astrologer in Jaipur. The astrologer looked at my chart and said, "You were a temple dancer in a past life." You see, that was a seed. I go back to New York. I'm at a party in New York. This is 2 weeks after I came from India. A woman I had never met before walks across the room to me and says, "You were a temple dancer in India in a past life." And that was the seed of that story. So you see, it's like you plant a seed of reality, and then the play begins. You play with it and go about it. The sessions, all of that. The rest is imagined, but or maybe not. Maybe it's remembering. Who knows? But to me, past lives, it's not idea. It's a reality. Because I've experienced past lives since I was 7 years old. So I was kind of a strange child, you might say. But anyway, so in terms, what was the other part of your question?
The other part of question was on a slightly different note, was that
Yes.
in spite of the fact that the protagonist in the story is on a spiritual quest, the speaker never loses sight of social realities. And
oh, well, that wasn't a question. That was a statement. Right. Yeah.
Right. So,
and you know, the Westerner that's a little bit like me is not in all the stories. Some of them are only Indians, like Lakshmi's Treasure, which is one of my favorites. It's all Indians, and it deals with the plight of the farmers in India. You might not have read that one.
Yeah, no, I haven't.
I think you would like that because it deals with some social problems and such, and also about kidnapping young children for sexual exploitation. So, and that's purely Indian stories. So they're different, but two or three of them are about a little bit of my own seeds. Like tea with Mrs. Gandhi, because when I had tea with her, with my husband, Raja Rao, there were 2 Sikh bodyguards in the room while we had tea. And those, I am assuming, are the ones who killed her a few months later. So obviously, I couldn't help but write about that because, you know, often life is more dramatic than anything you could imagine. So you're going to draw from life in one way or another. Yeah. Did I respond to what you
Yeah. So, Sachin, would you like to continue, or do you?
I think I can take on later on in the round. I mean.
Sure. So, I just to add on to that one bit about the past, as you were saying, and Catherine, in your book, you've also kind of used Faulkner, you know, to quote him. You say, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." You know, so this kind
he
of
wasn't referring to past lives, but I was using it.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. So I think there is this interplay that one feels all through, you know, the question of the past and the present, and past not being, or the past in the present, rather. And one also wonders that it could be also futuristic, you know, the past being futuristic. It's very interesting the way the stories weave themselves. But what I also like is the extremely simple style with which you do it. It's a very complex world that you present in a very simple style,
Yeah.
with a very simple narratology. If at all I want to use as an academic that word narratology deliberately, because then we
Yeah.
make too much out of the form, etc. So it comes across in a very, very simple way and very appreciatively. And we talk about how just the tip of the iceberg is available, but we know there is a lot underneath it, which
I
one
think
needs
it's
to.
probably because I wrote for Hollywood for some years, and you learn there to tell complex stories in a very simple way to be accessible.
Yes.
I think that
Yes,
rubbed
so-
off somewhere.
Yes, and there is a readability which is very charming. And particularly as academics, I think we need to go into a refresher course on simple narratives and the complexity that lies beyond, And we don't need to capture it all in words. Let's just experience it, So
Well,
anyway, that's
in writing plays and film, you kind of point to things rather than overdo. You don't make it too obvious, hopefully. And
Yes.
as a playwright, I'm character oriented. With me, the characters are more important than the plot. So I follow the characters.
Yes.
So
Yes. Thank you. So
Yeah.
let's go on to the next speaker now, Mr. Roger Edwin Mark Lee. Can I request you to please take over the platform now?
Yes, well, I'm happy to participate in this forum. I've known Catherine for more than 50 years. And I must say, I'm delighted that she, in a way, instead of writing a classical autobiography, she wrote 15 stories that really tell a lot about her life, her own life. And I've heard many of the phrases, many of the quotes, many of the subplots that are in the 15 stories. I've heard them directly from Catherine as she describes the reality of her very, very colorful and extensive creative life. So to read them now, woven into not so fictional stories, is really a delight. As I read a book, I find myself thinking, is this book going to last? Does it have a life beyond a year? That's the publishers usually think of the life of a good book as being 1 year. So I asked the question, will East, West, will it have a life beyond? And I think in an unusual way, it will, because instead of keeping the stories very generic and not referencing current events and so on, authors, I think, hope to give an immortality dimension to their themes. But in this case, Catherine has quoted from current events. I mean, things that probably wouldn't appear except in the newspaper. I mean, the rape of the girl on the Delhi bus. Things about plays and films that are currently popular and are being shown, in a way, binds the book to the time, to the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century. So I think in that way, the book is going to be instructional. I think it could be as an example of storytelling that is may seem time-bound, but in actual fact is not, because the themes are so universal and so just universal. I was delighted to see all the quotes, beginning of each story. There's a quote, there are quotes within some of the stories. As Catherine has a rich archive of quotes of famous authors and personalities and so on. And she often peppers her conversations with quotes from these characters. And now she's used them adroitly in this book by beginning each story with a salient quote. So that was a feature that I appreciated very much.
Mark, could I respond to that very quickly?
Yes.
And Sukrita also mentioned how she liked the quotes. My publisher told me to cut the quotes. He says it's not nonfiction, so short stories don't have quotes before the story. And I said, well, this one does, because I wanted to put out a theme so the reader could focus on the theme before reading the story. And both of you have cited that. And I'm happy to hear that, because I was a
Never
little
listen. Never
I
listen to
also-
the book.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Anyway, I
also,
just had to thank you for saying that. Sorry.
Yeah. I was also delighted in reading the review of the book by, I think it was the Times of India, that said each story could be a film.
Yes.
And I wondered if, as you wrote these stories, did you have that in mind?
Actually, no, except since I'm a screenwriter and playwright, I write dramatically. It's automatic, but I didn't consciously. It was only later when I read them, when I finished writing them, I thought at least 10 of the 15, I think, could be a film. I could see it.
Right.
And of course, I love to adapt it if possible.
Well, I found myself as I read, and I would come to the end of a paragraph, and I thought, oh, I wish it went on. It was the sentences, the few, opened a subject, gave some really thoughtful things, and now she's on to another paragraph. And I thought, well, maybe she's thinking that this is the way this will come out in the film. It'll be developed further in the
That's
screenplay.
interesting. I do write sparsely.
Right.
I tend to focus on what happens between the people. Even when I would read writers like Henry James years ago, he would spend a page and a half describing a table leg. I would skip that and get to what's happening between the characters. So I guess I am a little sparse compared to more literary writers. Yeah.
I think that many of these stories could be shared with children. I don't think this is exclusive for adults. Some of them not, but some of them definitely. So I appreciated the large font as well. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. And I think the key that I take from you is about how most of this writing is instruction. You know, I love that, because without really taking on the role of an instructor, this story, the output is that of instruction, because it really triggers off a lot of thought process. I mean, this sparse writing, as you say, Catherine, it is that helps us to take over also. The reader also wants to participate, in the making of the story. So the gaps that one might feel are the gaps that need to be filled up in the mind of the reader, I think.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I really appreciate
Yes.
that. Appreciate the fact that you invite participation of the reader. So it's not
Yeah.
just exclusive writer's story, right? So
Thank you.
with that, we come at the end of the first round. But I think before we go into what we call the absolute last bit of thanking everyone, let's have a small Q&A session. And let's check if there are some questions that have been left by people. Are there any that anyone sees, and one can probably then attend to them?
Ma'am, no, not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't matter. I think many of us are actually in the chat mood and mode. And so we are talking to Catherine, asking our own questions. I think one of the things that I would like to start with, talking about, and apart from many of the other things that have been raised here, is this whole question of using, for instance, the dance form which you are attracted to in Kerala, right? And in the story, you make use of that and take it to mystical levels. So did you have to do a lot of research to understand every dance form to be able to, particularly not every, but at least that dance form, Theyyam, where
Yes.
you are really going deep?
Actually, my Fulbright research year, I chose pre-Hindu ritual and dance drama forms, shamanic forms, over 5,000-year-old forms. And of course, Kathakali I had seen, but the earlier Theyyam fascinated me. So I did see those, and I was able to get videotapes because for hundreds of years, it's gone from father to son, these forms of dance. And now the sons are not following, they're going, they're studying computer science or whatever. So, and the temples are not underwriting it. So I thought it was important to get some videos of the actual dances while we still have them. And then I gave those to, I was invited to teach a course on the Indian culture at the University of Texas. So I donated the films to the Asian department so they would, if someone wanted to do a PhD thesis on it, to keep it alive. So that fascinated me. So I did watch a lot of those dance, drama forms. In the West, people know Bharatanatyam, but they don't know the other earlier forms. Yeah. So those were my seeds that I used.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and I think that's why there is a lot of both authenticity, and it becomes very convincing when you talk about it. It doesn't look as though there is just a superficial look at it and you're making comments like a tourist would. It's not like a tourist perspective.
I have never been a tourist in India. I hope I never will.
Yes. So that was really nice. Mark, did you have anything to say?
Or questions? Do you have any questions, Mark, about any of the stories? Or
no, are you thinking of another book?
Well, the next one to be published, I've already done the work are 4 of my long plays, and I'm calling it Remarkable Women. 4 plays. They've been produced, but I thought, get them out there. So that'll be the next. And I think of different books all the time. If I could live another 50 years, I could write the ones I've thought about, but I do hope to, yes, write a few. I don't think I'll be around in 50 years, but hypothetically, I'm saying.
Yeah.
You
Because,
have,
it's one thing to think of a book, it's another thing to spend so many months and execute it. I even
Yes,
want
well-
to do a book on cats, a biography of the cats I've
हेलो
had.
हाँ अभी आपने फोन किया था ना प्रभा खादन का डायरी के लिए
well,
पाठ कर रहा
you've captured the
I've got-
short story genre well. So
Yes.
a book of,
हेलो
another book of short stories, I think would be,
Well, yes,
would do
I
well.
have written one set in North America.
हाँ
I
आपको
thought I might do.
फोन किया था वो पार्सल भिजवाने
Is there an interruption?
हाँ तो
There's
मैं
some
ये कह रहा, जो भी आएगा उसे बोलना
Hello,
कि
I-
Sandeep, you please
गाड़ी में
mute
लिखवाना है।
yourself.
I-
Sandeep, please
अंदर
mute
करके
yourself.
बाहर-
Usha, could you
पार्सल-
mute whoever is talking?
Sandeep, please mute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Anyway, I thought of doing a book of short stories set in my country here. So I've done one of those, but that's the
I'd
idea.
like to Catherine, I'd like to comment a little bit on, your style of writing in the context of, say, a story like that rape story. What is it called? The Bus Home, isn't it?
The bus home.
I think this is so yeah, I think it's done so well because there isn't any dramatic element of horror that you introduce. It's a very matter of fact description, and the impact is that of horror.
Exactly.
that
I
is
mean,
what
the
it-
bare facts are horrific.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and also the way you juxtapose the dreaming girl, with the reality that she faces and how
Yeah.
it comes crashing down quietly, and yet the impact is so strong. It's very, very strong. So I think that kind of diversity that you use of how to use drama in a short story, this could have become very, very dramatic, but you're not making it dramatic in a it's the what triggered off this comment of mine is what Mark said, that you have kind of in a very masterly way handled the form of the short story. So in a short story, you're not making it just drama, right? So it's that matter of fact style that I wanted to point out here in a big way. Sachin, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, actually, points were raised again by Mark as well as you. But then again, coming back to the question of form as short story, I thought that there was material in there which might be worked into a novel as well. There are things that connect multiple stories. So have you thought of working on a novel? Because I think short story comes closer to drama in terms of its what should I say, theatrical element or incidental aspect of it. The novel becomes a whole new thing. So have you
As-
thought
Yeah,
maybe-
of course I have. I think, I started my writing life writing poetry. And then I've done plays, television, film, and now I hadn't written short stories before this book, so it's a new form. And I keep avoiding the novel. I think I'm trying to get the courage to go that next step. But as a reader, I've always found a good short story could be a novel. I think the great short stories like Borges or Chekhov, you realize that it's like a novel just condensed. And that's sort of, it's a high mark, but that's the goal, is to find. that, but I appreciate your saying because I'm new to writing short stories. So
And you find it closer to plays and film, uh, plays,
no,
short story as a genre, or do you find it very different?
no, it would be closer to a novel, only short. No, it's very different than writing. But I can't help but write in a dramatic way because, you know, I'm an actor, playwright, screenwriter. So we don't have to guess where the drama comes from. Yeah. But I love the form. I think it's forgotten today, short stories a bit. You know, it used to be more popular, but I love the form. It's also wonderful to write them because you don't have to spend 6 months on writing one. You can just
And 6
write
months
them
on
in a
reading
day or
them,
two.
for example.
Pardon?
You don't have to spend 6 months on reading them as well.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
it's,
But I think what is very beautiful is that, you know, a short story, and I'm repeating myself, but I would like to, and that is that the short story leaves the impact of a novel, actually, you know. And
yes.
so the canvas, the in-depth way in which that it's not just a glimpse, it's an insight. You know, it's an insight that gets presented in a short story. So that short story. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, that's it. So that short story can become a very long story in the mind of the reader.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's very different. That's why when you said you started writing as a poem, it occurred to me because I, as a poet, I feel much closer to a short story. You know, I feel that I can, yeah. So
Yeah.
I want to condense, I want to compress my words, number of words in a poem. And the same would be true, perhaps, in a short story as well. I hate verbosity.
Yeah, and going away from the topic a bit, I think in Indian context, it's not the novel that really works for me in Indian literature. It's always the short story. It's always brilliant in Indian context. Short story is the form of India, maybe, probably.
Really?
That's my personal statement.
Have you read Abraham Varghese?
No, I've heard a lot about him.
He's a wonderful novelist. He writes 700-page novels, Cutting for Stone and The Covenant of Water, set in South India. He's a wonderful writer, long books. But I hadn't thought that short story was more an Indian thing than novels. That's interesting.
It probably came from.
It's not a.
Sachin, if I may, you know, I feel that short story came from probably the West, but it has stayed on in India in a much more effective fashion.
Good.
And in fact, you know, we are moving on to flash fiction. Flash fiction, which is actually what we call in Hindi or in other Indian languages, some of them, Lagu Katha, a short story, you know.
Yeah.
So just a para or a few lines, but it makes a story. So Lagu Katha is the short story or flash fiction or shorts. They are getting to be a little more popular than before now out here. And more people are writing that kind of work. So shall we call it a day at the end? And I would just basically just like to once again appreciate your, Catherine, your wonderful output here, where your drama
That's very
is
encouraging since I'm new to that form. It's very encouraging.
Also, you know, in between when you come out with, like Bach pointed out, you know, these quotations, you make your own quotations also in the short stories many a time. Like, you know, these are quotable quotes. Humiliation is initiation. I think this is something very beautiful. I've been thinking about it. I don't know which story. Was it in the men's club? Maybe there, because that story I was really focusing on.
Yeah.
And I think that such like statements when you read they really stay with you because you want to think about that complex situation. What can humiliation do to one? Initiate one to a whole new, particularly, I think it's to do with the, people who are in a school or rather in a college like St. Stephen's and then get humiliated. Oh my goodness, then what happens? It is a neat initiation to another whole world which you've not experienced at all. And how it brings in humility in a big way, So anyway, so these are, they also tie up with what Mark said, this is instruction, it's awareness. So a lot of your talent in theater, talent in poetry, talent in, if you haven't been a teacher, you're also a teacher here, right? You are arousing awareness. So, and doing it all in a very simple style. And that is what is really to be appreciated, because the way the narrativity runs, and it's not just linear, because there are lots and lots of layers that you come across of discovering reality, the way, multiple levels of reality, the way they come across. Thank you very much, Catherine, for the lovely
thank you all.
book.
I appreciate it.
And thank you, Mark, and thank you, Sachin, for coming together on this. And thank you, IIC and Usha.
Yeah.
And
Thank you very much
Sandeep
for such lovely discussions. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.